Hello there and welcome to this vlog of March 2022, and today I'm going to be talking about how to solve a problem like the clans. Now, before I get into this, I need to make it very clear that I am not a clan player as such, but I do have a lot of clan forces. That's mainly because I really like what the clans are in a narrative sense. Like, I think they're a very interesting, probably the most interesting thing actually in BattleTech when it comes to like consequences of actions in terms of, you know, like how how Kerensky disappeared with like this really like positive intention of not allowing his force to be used by any inner sphere power to like destroy another, and also to kind of protect his people from this constant warfare that they'd been going through for years and years in the American Civil War, and how that kind of like real idealized notion that Kerensky had came back to bite everybody like 1,000 times over. I like that. It's got like historical irony that we see in our own history like over and over again. So I've got no problem with them in that respect. And as well, they're a super fun like antagonist as well, whether it's on tabletop or in the games. I mean, their culture and their society is so like maxed out and so quirky and like aggressive that they're almost like aliens. I know people say that like, oh, you know, there are no aliens in BattleTech, and there aren't, but the clans are as close as it gets. Like, I don't think you can really look at clan culture and say, yeah, that looks like something we recognise, because it might do, like in history, I'm sure it does, but as a modern people, we kind of look at that and think, how have they regressed so much, and how do they kind of, you know, build their society around like an honour system? It's very bizarre. But like I say, as antagonists, I really appreciate what they are within like the tabletop games, lore, things like that. You must have a strong antagonist, and the clans are very much a strong antagonist. That all being said, there were, I think, a lot of problems when they released the clans as a thing, and I think they made some pretty significant mistakes with it. Now, I always looked at it, and I mean, I came into BattleTech like during the clan invasion, but I kind of put myself into the shoes of someone who was like, say, 25 years old in 1988, and had just kind of, you know, really kind of got into BattleTech and loved the succession wars and the powers and everything else. And then all of a sudden, they released a new version of the game, because that's what effectively the clan invasion is, which is just like a very crunchy update. And, you know, all gaming studios and companies do things like that because it keeps the game fresh and it gives them more things to sell. That's completely fine, obviously, and good as well. It's good to kind of to throw like curveballs at the franchise every so often to keep it vibrant and interesting. And what happens then is your player base find like meta ways around it. So I've got no problem at all with doing things like that. But going back to that, like, say, 25-year-old in 1988, if they were so used to that kind of tactical system that that FASA and you know, like the BattleTech rule system had designed, I think you'd be very upset with what the clans did. I think it took so much out of BattleTech when it comes to like a tactical game, because BattleTech is a very tactical game. It's, you know, I know people get like time frustrated with Classic because it takes quite a while to run like a, say, a Lance on Lance Classic game, but the fact that down to even like the micro level, dependent on which way your mech is facing, depends on like the percentage hit ratio of hitting a certain torso or a leg or whatever else. So when you kind of factor in all that, there is so much going on in like a game of BattleTech that you have to kind of be aware of. And the clan invasion really kind of, for want of a better term, retconned all this and just made it very, very like whoever has the biggest guns win. Now, as I said previously, the meta within a gaming community will eventually find ways around that, and that absolutely happened. I'll go on to talk about this as we go through this video. But I think that there were kind of, you know, errors made in the rule set that went too far in like the, not just the crunch, but in really like negating the tactical systems that they'd created within BattleTech. But for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about now, I mean, I've got notes today for once. I usually never bring notes. I just I might have a couple of phrases that I write down because I forget them. But today I've actually brought like a bit of a structure to follow, because what I want to discuss is like the problems within the clans and then the potential fixes for them, as you know, this video's title would suggest. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to run through the problems first, and the first one, which is by far the biggest, is, and I've already touched on it already, that kind of negating of the tactical elements in BattleTech and how the clans really like trample over that. Not the clans as a thing. I'm talking about like, you know, the enhanced weapon systems and, you know, all the little magical or space magic things that they bring to bear, which just kind of take everybody else out of the equation, or take all the tactics out of the equation. So the first one, and I need to kind of separate this first between what I'd call like crunchy little tricks within the clans, which I actually quite like, and then really like absolutely unspeakably terrible like tactical trouncing that occurs. So we'll go from one spectrum to the other. So the first one, and the example that I kind of thought of, is the XL engine as kind of the nice crunchy one. And if you play BattleTech on tabletop, and you know enough people who play Inner Sphere Forces, you know that there's kind of this debate that rages. I don't even know if it is a debate anymore. I think it's probably been settled that the XL engines for the Inner Sphere Forces are not good. Which is kind of a shame, because, you know, they are far superior engines to like a regular fusion engine, but they come with one major drawback, and that's that they have 3 points of, I don't know what you call it, slots or space, whatever else you want to call it, within the chassis. 3 points of it actually exist in the side torso. So that means you've got, you know, 3 points on either side torso, and then I think, going off memory now, I think you've then got 2 points in like the upper section and the lower section of the centre torso, I think, so you've got 12 points altogether. Now, the problem is with that obviously 3 hits on an engine disable the mech. Like, the mech can't basically move anymore, and it's basically seen as crippled and out of action. Now, that means, if you think about it, if a side torso gets blown up, which happens quite often in BattleTech, you automatically die because your engine's gone. There are 3 points in there. You lose all 3 points of hits when it comes to your kind of engine health points, whatever you want to call them. Therefore, the mech's out of action. The clans get around that by only having 2 points in the side torsos, which is super cheeky, but I really like that. I think that little like tricky things like that exist within the clans are like really, really interesting and fun. And it's important to note as well that in the lore, they absolutely deserve that. Because unlike the Inner Sphere, who ran through these like horrible succession wars that basically destroyed their entire, like, well, not their entirety, but a lot of their industrial and scientific base, the clans never made that mistake. In fact, they went on to develop the Starling Technology. So it's why, for instance, and you'll know this if you play tabletop, that clan pulse weaponry has like double the range of the Inner Sphere pulse weaponry, which is huge as a tabletop like tactical factor. That kind of segues me onto kind of the middle ground elements of what the clans are doing in the crunch. And I quite like the fact that their weapons are better in that respect, in terms of like damage output and range. I think that's actually a very beneficial thing. I think it shows off kind of the uniqueness within like the clan design when it comes to like their amazing science, and it also is kind of a bit of a lesson for the Inner Sphere. Like, yeah, maybe don't destroy your entire industrial and scientific base. I keep saying entirety. They obviously don't destroy the entirety, but they lose a lot of the ability to make the Starling weaponry and electronic equipment, etc. But I know people complain about that. The biggest complaint I think people have got is on the L-Pulse. The L-Pulse is an insane weapon. A clan M-Pulse, that is. It's it seems broken. Like when you're looking at it, like prima facie, it's like that can't be right. That's just so mad. But I don't actually have any problems with that because the inner sphere still have access. I mean, even though the L pulses of the inner sphere don't have that kind of range, if you kind of look at it like the inner sphere forces are going to probably have more on the table, you can therefore potentially bring more L pulses, and it just means you have to try and survive long enough to get close enough to the clans to use it. So I don't think that is broken. I think it's just a perk that the clans have, and that they're always trying to kind of attack from range, which is a real kind of facet of what the clans try to do. You know, they really hate all like aspects of physical combat. I mean, the rule kind of is written is that a clan mech can't engage in physical combat unless an inner sphere mech goes and like punches them first. Then kind of all bets are off. But generally speaking, I think the range that the clans have is one of their like lore characteristics, which I've got no problem with really. This is where it gets broken though, and this is where what I'm going to talk about next is what I think really kills the tactical element of BattleTech, and this I think was a major mistake. And that's when they basically like kiboshed all the minimum range penalties for clan weaponry. So what does that mean? Well, the two big ones, there may be others as well, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the ones that I've kind of written down here is the long range missiles and the extended range PPC. Neither of those weapons have minimum range penalties, which is a problem because, well, first of all, I think the LRMs are the biggest problem. Because why would you ever bother bringing, like, SRMs, really? I know the SRMs do more damage, but the whole point of the whole difference between an SRM and an LRM is that, like, the LRMs are very, very useful and have, like, the indirect fire rule and all that kind of stuff, but you can only hit with them at a certain range. Like, once you get into close proximity of a mech, you're really taking, like, bad minimum range penalties, which can have a pretty nasty effect on your mech, especially if you are loaded out just with LRMs. Tactically though, and this is exactly the same thing applies to the extended range PPC. Not as much though, because the ERPPC has like less problems. It's like half the minimum range problems that the LRMs have. But it means then that the whole tactical nuance of BattleTech, which has always been that like that battlefield dynamic between going in close to an opponent and trying to keep them at range and like skirmish them or get them into like a, you know, or do you close in and try to get them into like a circle of death where you've got like mechs surrounding them and just shooting them to pieces. Well, for clan mechs, the problem is that it becomes then like a who has got the biggest best gun, because whatever the inner sphere powers do, it kills that, like what I'd call like a core fundamental tactic of what BattleTech is, which is that constant, like, for want of a better term, I call it like zones of control. Like, at what point do you keep your mechs back to kind of do the LRM fire? At what point do you kind of go in for a kill or try to take an objective? I think that the problem with the I don't know, the retconning, it's not retconning, because obviously the inner sphere still have minimum range penalties, but when you take it away from one side, it just kills the tactical nuance within the game. And that to me is the main problem with the clans. The second issue that I've got written down here is that I think, and this kind of goes to the point of like the game, like the meta game within the game, where you've got like you put the rules set out, so the clan rules get announced and the mechs get released and everything else, and then the more crunchy players really get into that because obviously they've got like superior weapon systems and engines and things like that. But the diehard like inner sphere players, that 20-something-year-old that I was talking about, who's like completely like, no, I'm sticking with my Federated Suns force because that's what I love. Well, they have to then think about crunchy ways to get around the clans. And that, I think, strips a lot of joy out of the game, because what you find is that you can, like, a regular, like, clan star. So let's say it's just, like, 5. Let's say it's, like, a heavy clan star. It's going to come in at about between 13 and 15,000, like, battle value, the 2.0 battle value, approximately. That what would that then mean is that the inner sphere player is probably going to think, well, I just need to get as many guns on the table as possible. I don't have to worry about armor or anything else. So what I'm going to bring is, I don't know what that would equate to, 26, 27 Saladins, like, you know, the hover tanks with the AC-20s. So you basically, like, say you bring 25, you're basically bringing 25 AC-20s to the board. And, I mean, that, I suppose, just as like an experiment that would be quite fun, you know, games like that where people just bring like really like infantry heavy forces, or just like those famously the hover tanks, because they don't take like any kind of penalties to like going across water, obviously, because they're hover tanks. So they've got maneuverability, they've got solid weaponry. I mean, like a Saladin with the AC-20 in its nose. I mean, you can pack hunt with like 3 or 4 of them on a mech and do it pretty horrendous damage. I mean, they're not all going to survive. You're going to lose a lot of units, but you're probably going to win the game. And that then kind of boils into the whole, like, of, you know, boils down to the fact that, like, you really kind of giving, like, the meta of the game this, like, how do I put this? Like, the meta trumps the fun. And that, I think, is a real problem for a game set. I come across a lot of games like that. I'll probably get heat for saying this, but whatever. I really don't like the game Gloomhaven. I've been playing it a little bit recently. I've got a friend who plays it, and it's one of those games, like, it's very, very clever. You know, it's like the card system that they've got is very well done. But I find that it's so, like, there's so much, like, meta weirdness going on there in terms of what cards you play at what time, that I'm just, like, sat there thinking, I'm not taking any, like, joy from this, right? Like, it's... Now, again, I know that can be quite controversial, because I know that Gloomhaven is, like, a super popular game, but what I want is, like, I want, as somebody famously said, I have no idea who this quote is, like, attributed to, but, you know, the best games are ones that are simple to learn but difficult to master. You know, the reverse of that is then when you get, like, too meta heavy, in my opinion, where it's like, well, you've got to bring this certain list or do this certain thing or you can't win. And I don't like things like that. I like it to be... That's why I really like Succession Wars era BattleTech, because it's so simple. There's, like, very little electronics. There's not really any kind of weird stuff going on. It's just like, your lance, my lance, let's fight. And then that tactical play becomes like the chess within BattleTech. You know, that the complexity comes in then, like, you know, reacting to your opponent's move, as opposed to then bringing some, like, really amazing electronic equipment that's just going to kind of win them the game because they've got this amazing electronic equipment. So that, I think, is a problem. I'm not a crunch player. I like to kind of tie in things like narrative play and competitive play so that you can kind of have like the best of both worlds. I know a lot of people will disagree with that and think it's kind of diluting what you want to do. Like, you either play like narrative fluff and just go silly, or you do like the full competitive, you know, 10,000 battle value and not a point more, that kind of thing. But, you know, to each their own and all that. The next point is that, and this is kind of a practical point, is that when you're playing against the clans, I'll put it this way, if you go from playing Succession Wars to playing clans, you notice very, very quickly that games suddenly take an extra 2 hours to play, because the clans are, you know, they've all got case in there. So you can, like, do one of those lucky ammo hits and it only blows up a torso. As I said, if it's got an Excel engine, it won't then destroy the mech because, you know, there's only 2 points in there. So you end up with this situation where you go from what is I'm not saying classic BattleTech is certainly not a streamlined game. Just a Succession Wars 4-on-4 game can take a couple of hours. Probably, like, if you kind of speed things up and do some in-house rules, you can usually get it done with about 1.5 hours. And, you know, if you both know what you're doing anyway. But generally speaking, I think as soon as you introduce the clans to it, you have a situation where the inner sphere can really only win by, like, spamming out certain units and playing, like, meta lists. Whereas the clans then have these, like, really super crunchy, like, mechs that are just difficult to kill. So that I don't like. You know, I like not that I'm not a fan of like fast games. I know that people will say, oh, the sweet spot for a game is like say 40-45 minutes. I don't agree with that. I like games that will go on for like a couple of hours because then you can really get into it. Usually as well, what I do if I'm playing BattleTech is, I don't know, let's say we've got like a 12 turn maximum or something like that. After 6 turns, after you've kind of finished the 6th turn, which you might have done after say like an hour and 30 minutes or something like that. If it's a long game, if you kind of, you've might got like augmented lances on there or vehicles and stuff like that. You just kind of, you say to your opponent, let's go get a drink, let's, whatever, like sit and chat for half an hour and clear our minds of it all, and then we'll go back to it. So, if you're kind of going to spend like an afternoon wargaming or whatever, I think that's a really good way to do it, as opposed to kind of trying to play like 3-4 hours at a time. I think by the 3rd hour, my head usually starts to hurt because you've constantly got that, like, you're having that discussion with someone else, you're trying to concentrate on the tactical side of it. So I like games that have got a decent amount of play. But I think when you introduce the clans to it, it's suddenly like the time levels suddenly like ramp up, which I think for young people especially, that can be a problem. So, because obviously if you're playing like computer games now, computer games are usually pretty quick and dirty, as opposed to the games that I used to play, which can kind of go on for ridiculous amounts of time. Obviously, I'm really generalising there. There are modern games that take a lot more time management, but generally speaking, I think that younger people, because we live in the age of like instant gratification, games need to reflect that to some extent and make them a little bit more streamlined. Hence why things like Alpha Strike are popular, as opposed to like classic BattleTech, which is more time, like resource heavy. Although for me, like I said, I've said this a few times as well, I think you can like homebrew a lot of the old classic BattleTech to make it faster, so that's a thing. The third point here, which is the 4th point on this list, which is quite like important as well, but it's a bit of a like a theoretical thing really, is that I think it did alienate a lot of players. I think a lot of people who went during like the Succession Wars, which was so equal, like there was no real like one side may have had a slight advantage in if you were playing a certain like objective rule or something like that. For instance, I can imagine that if you play like Karita and you were playing like I don't know, like capture the flag or who has the most objectives, I think in the Succession Wars the Karita have the advantage on that because they tend to bring light mechs. So if you bring in things like, especially Jenners, not so much Panthers, I think they're pretty slow, but Jenners are really, really quick, and that's kind of a mech that's really associated with the Draconis Combine. Then you have little things like that, or if you're doing like a stand-up fight, you'd probably say that like House Steiner are going to be in that battle for quite a while because they tend to bring like heavy and assault mechs. But generally speaking, that's kind of a player's style, or you kind of bring a force to, or horses for courses type thing, where you bring a force that works for you within that kind of objective that you're playing. But it's not too bad. Like it only fluctuates a little bit from like the base. But I think like a lot of players playing BattleTech would have just looked at the clans, back when it was released as a thing, and thought this is just like rotten. Now they didn't have to wait very long, to be fair, because eventually the Inner Sphere really like catch up to it. Eventually, of course, the Inner Sphere win through their kind of industrial might. But I'm not really kind of focusing on the lore here. I'm kind of going more towards the tabletop stuff, as you can see. So, and I think again that even though they did try to fix a lot of it within what was going on, like post-clan invasion, I think they didn't go far enough. I think the clans really needed to be negated and to kind of bring it back to like a base level. And I think they did that to some extent, but I get a feeling that someone within the kind of writing team had kind of fallen in love a little bit with the clans. Maybe it was their baby or their invention. And they always kind of felt like they had to go back to kind of giving them the push. I think that's been like proved out as well by what's happened in the recent lore in BattleTech, which is something I know about, but I don't read it. I don't want anything to do with it, to be honest. I'm very much a I've said this probably the millionth time I've said this, but I only play like 3025 to 3067. But my understanding is that Clan Wolf now kind of rule Terra, and the Inner Sphere is now like a clan domain. This is in like 3150 era that time. That shows me a lot what direction they wanted to go in. That they had this kind of now. Before I say that, granted, Clan Wolf are not the worst of the clans. They're not Smoke Jaguar or Jade Falcon, but they're still clans. And I think whoever was writing for them at, whether it was FASA or now at Catalyst, they seem to have this like connectivity to the clans, which I would really like to see broken. I think the clans served their purpose as like a narrative thing, but I think it then needed to really kind of get back to the Inner Sphere, which it's kind of failed to do in a lot of ways, which is probably why the alienation sets in for fans, because if you don't like the clans anyway, and then they're appearing everywhere with their highly crunchy crunch mechs, then you are going to get pretty irritated by that. So let's go on to some fixes. Now, the first two of these one's kind of an official one, one's kind of an unofficial one that I've seen done quite a few times, and the third one it's not mine, the third one, but it's something that I think that they should have, or the mistake that they made that they should retcon. Say that. So the first one is obvious in terms of how you fix them, and that's you use the clan culture against them, which is kind of the rule as written for the clans. So they obviously have Zelbriggen, which is the kind of clan dual honour system, which kind of, I'm not going to go through that because quite frankly I think it's rubbish. I just, like, playing that on tabletop is nightmarish. I don't even want to promote it, to be honest, because it's bad. But it's basically, when you read between the lines, it's creating a system whereby the Inner Sphere can kind of use clan culture against them and kind of get into one-on-one duel fights with mechs. Now, in a sense, they kind of retconned their retcon by saying stuff like, oh, well, eventually the clans wouldn't have done Zelbriggen against the Inner Sphere because they knew the Inner Sphere were trying to game them. Like, that's essentially what the Battle of Tukiad was. It was just kind of a giant, like, let's use clan culture to defeat them, which is what happened. So that's the first one, and that's, to me, not a good one, because, I mean, if you think about, like, if I'm going to talk about extended range penalties killing the tactics, Zelbriggen just absolutely ruins the tactics, because the game, it becomes a completely different game set. It becomes one-on-one, like, honor duel battles, which is not what BattleTech is made for. It's meant for like clan versus clan, lands versus lands combat, or star versus lands combat, where you're using your team to kind of, elevate strengths and hide weaknesses of each other, and trying to kind of really get that tactical advantage. Well, Zelbriggen completely wrecks that, and is terrible, to be frank. The second one, which I've seen people do on tabletop, I don't like this one though, and that's that you nerf all the kind of minimum range penalties. So you give the extended range PPC minimum range penalties back. You give the clan LRMs minimum range penalties back. You can even go so far as to kind of either bump up the L pulses and the M pulses of the Inner Sphere to the same kind of range and damage, or you can nerf the clan ones to kind of bring them down to kind of give some kind of like equilibrium. I really don't like that though, because it interferes with the lore too much. Like I said, I think the clans deserve their kind of scientific advantage. Another major factor in that is that it really ruins kind of an already ruined battle values system. So 2.0, I mean, you'd have to kind of really go back into it, see how much like an L pulse is worth for the Inner Sphere or the clans, and depending on what you were doing, would then have to change the value accordingly. And I kind of use battle value as a guide anyway. I'd never do it strict, but because it doesn't work. I mean, it's not something that I think, I mean, you could say like, well, what is better? Is it better to do C builds? Is it better to do tonnage? No, they're both terrible as well. I think it's a major problem within the entire BattleTech like realm that no one's actually codified what it is to have like a force and then like a battle value appropriate force. It's like everyone's got their own homebrew sets. Everyone uses their own rules, and I like the charm of that because it makes it a very like personal game, and it enhances the community to some extent as well. But what I don't like about it is that it's just very complex. That in terms of like just turning up with a force and saying, well, I'm going to play this, whatever. You can kind of do it with enough like preparation. You can do it, for instance, you could say it like a tournament. Well, it's 10,000 battle value, maximum. You're only allowed to bring 2 non-mech units. You can kind of set in those rules. But I feel like every tournament would be so different, as opposed to something like, let's say if you went to like an official Games Workshop tournament, like their rules as written is for the latest version and that's it. Now you can get into a whole different discussion about that Games Workshop are like a nightmare fuel company when it comes to retconning their own produce and, like having a new version every 3 years which completely destroys your armies and things like that's a, you don't think you have to go that far, but it is nice with Games Workshop that you can rock up and you all know the rules which you are playing. And for a tournament organizer, that's going to be pretty simple because there might be a couple of things that you kind of tweak for your tournament for reasons, and if people like that, they'll come, and if they don't, they won't. So, with BattleTech, I always feel like if you were going to a tournament, which, I think in my entire life I've been to like one BattleTech tournament. It was a long, long time ago when I was like a teenager. And I mean, back then I didn't know anything like I know now about like the tactical side of it and everything else. So it's difficult to kind of quantify what I thought. But I think if I went now to a tournament, I'd literally have to kind of study their rule book in terms of what we were allowed to do, because BattleTech is just so convoluted and messy when it comes to the rules set. And like I said, there are some advantages like that to that, but they're few and far between. And I think messing with a gaming system like that, where you're kind of retconning like weapon systems and loadouts and things like that, it just adds like a real like layer of homebrew mess to the entire thing. So I'm not a fan of that. So then, it's been a long journey. What is my solution to this? Well, my solution to this is something that I've heard a few people talk about in the past. I don't know how regular this is as a conversation. I think it works really, really well, though, and I do it often with clan forces, and it kind of, I'll pick through how it kind of solves a lot of the problems that I was talking about earlier. Now, my solution is, work for it, 3 pointed stars. So, if you know what the clans are, you know that a traditional clan, like star, is 5 max. That for me is a major problem, and that's the key mistake I think that they made back in the the late 80s, early 90s when they were designing the clans. For several reasons. I know, like, when you're kind of looking at it, putting yourself in the shoes of the people designing for BattleTech back then, they wanted every single advantage to be with the clans, right? So they wanted them to numerical superiority, so it's 5 in a star as opposed to 4 in a lance. They wanted all the advantages on equipment and electronics, and even down to like the mech warriors. The mech warriors are just much better. That could be another point actually on how to nerf this. Like you could actually bring the clan pilots and the inner sphere pilots to some kind of equilibrium, but again that goes against the law because clans are like eugenic program warriors and just better shooting and things like that. Anyway, I won't cover that here because that one's an obvious one. But going back to the 3 pointed star thing, I think that that's the mistake that they really, really made. And I think it's a law error as well. I'll tell you why I think it's a law error, because in kind of clan society, they are like really obsessed with like not wasting anything. They've got like a system of like barter in warfare, which I've always found intriguing and quite interesting. I think that's quite a good thing that they do, where it's like you've got to kind of bargain your forces before you go to battle. That's quite interesting. But one word that I'd really associate with the clans is austerity. And I think like if you think about it from their point of view, they were the remnants of the Star League that ended up in this really like brutal part of the galaxy where they found like 5 inhabitable worlds, and none of them were that nice. They had very limited resources. So yes, they maintained their science, their technology, everything else, but they didn't have like a mass industrial base to build on. What I think, therefore, they should have done in kind of the culture is that they actually brought it down from a lance of 4 to a star of 3. Again, a 3-pointed star, but this is the key point. But you supplement the 3-pointed star with elementals, so you still end up with 5 units on the battlefield, but it's 3 mechs and it's 2 points of elementals. So that's 10 elementals altogether. I also think that if you do that, that really kind of makes a clan player have to think twice about like loading up on assault and heavy mechs, because if you're going to use your elementals effectively, and elementals are very effective, they are pretty damn good actually. Once you get them into like range and they can climb onto an inner sphere mech, they just can tear it apart, or any other mech for that matter. And I would say, though, that if you're going to use those 2 points effectively, it really makes the clan player think about what they are taking, because the kind of the rules as written with how elementals operate is that they will kind of attach themselves onto a mech, and then that mech will run into the battle, and the elementals will jump off onto an opponent mech and start to tear into it with its claws and its little lasers or whatever. But if you just bring like heavy assault mechs that can't walk very quickly or run very quickly, or can't operate as like a delivery system for the elementals, then your elementals become a little bit like pointless, no pun intended, within the point. So what you'd probably have to do is you'd have to kind of always bring something like at heavy is probably something like a Battle Cobra, which is like a 40-ton very nippy mech. The clan elementals can attach onto the torsos. There are no weapons on the torsos of the Battle Cobra, so that means you can still fire your L pulses in both arms. So what I'm saying is you'd have to really kind of like ponder on like that. That would give you that like tactical debate that you'd have to kind of resolve before you went into a fight of are you willing to kind of sacrifice your like battle value level because to get the elementals into play, so that then maybe you've got then a couple of heavier and assault mech that can go in and do the wrecking. Now, I think like the best way to describe how I've done this is to kind of go through a little bit of a force list between like a traditional clan invasion era force attacking an inner sphere force. And to do this, I've actually just done the cartoon. So I've gone through, which very famously, and I think this was the signal to me that they actually did think about doing the 3-pointed star, is because the cartoon does it. That's back in the early 90s or mid-early 90s. Because if you watch the cartoon, you see very, very quickly that they only ever introduce 3 Omnimechs from the clan side, and that's the Thor. I'll give them their inner sphere names because that's always what's in my head. The Thor, the Vulture, and the Mad Cat. They do also bring Hunchback 2s, but it's really important to note that Hunchback 2 is a second line mech. It's not an Omnimech. They can't carry elementals. And I always looked at it like when, in terms of the people who were writing for that show, when they had the Hunchback 2s on show, they were second line mechs are traditionally used as like supplements to the main forces. But what you had elementals within the kind of confines of what was going on. So the elementals would kind of make an appearance and, get involved in the action. I can't remember off the top of my head whether it was 1 point or 2 points, no idea. But I think that was a signal that they were thinking about trying to do something like that. But unfortunately, they opted for the 5-point star situation, which when you're talking about Omnimechs, you can combine. I mean, you can combine Omnimechs and elementals because 5 elementals is basically a point. And this is weird, but a clan mech is effectively a point as well. It's kind of odd, but I mean they've got like an odd military structure. But I think within that, it's important to actually note that 5-3 system is really important because a trinary, which is the equivalent of a clan company, so an inner sphere company is 12 mechs, but a clan trinary is 15 units. So that's really quite important, that you've got to have something that kind of is divisible by 15, whether that's 3 or 5. Otherwise, it would just look odd. Like you can't have 4, for instance, you can't bring it back to a traditional lance because 4, 8, 12, 16 doesn't go into 15. So it's like, well, you've got you've got 3 mechs on there that aren't going to be doing anything. It makes it a bit weird. So I think doing the 3-pointed star, keeping it to 5 because you've got the 2 points of elementals in there, but just saying to a clan player, look, if you bring in the traditional attacking lands, it gets a bit different when you're talking about second line stuff, but you have that, like, your force will be 3 like mechs and 2 points of elementals, because the elementals I think are really fun in BattleTech. They're really interesting to play and to play against. They add a real extra tactical element within the game, and it also I think is very good for the clans because the elementals are allowed to do physical combat, which again gives them a different dynamic. It means that then the inner sphere going to want to close down very quickly in the knowledge that these elementals are going to climb up on the mechs and start tearing them apart, and they can be lethal at that. I mean, they're really, really nasty if they get on you and you don't sort it out quickly. Anyway, let me go to my example. I'm gonna do the how the cartoon looked in terms of one force versus another. And you'll see very quickly that this resolves a lot of the problems that I was talking about, because we'll do the clan force first. So we've got the Mad Cat, which is the prime variant, I believe, in the cartoon. That's 2737 battle value. We got the Vulture. That's again the prime. I think these are primes anyway. I don't think it ever really tells you. It might be in the source book somewhere, and I've just not seen it. But that's 2351 for the Vulture. The Thor. So the main mech. From the clan force here, that's the leadership mech. This is the variant M, and that's 2251, so it's actually the cheapest of the mechs. And then you've got 2 points of elementals, which comes in at 640. That gives you a grand total of 7979. So we'll just call it 8,000 battle value for those clans. Now, that's a hell of a lot healthier than like a clan traditional. Force of 5 mechs, where it might bring you up to between 12 and 15,000 points, which then means the inner sphere has to potentially bring 2 lances and lots of vehicles, or worse still, all vehicles, where it just becomes, like I say, a crunchy mess. The inner sphere force to counter this will be the Axeman. This is famously the 2N variant, the one with the 2 LRM-15s on the side torsos. That's 1458. So you can already see straight away that's a very actually that variant of the Axeman I don't think is that good, but that's still a pretty low battle value cost compared to the clan mechs, as you'd expect. We got the Mauler, the KO variant. I don't think I could find a battle value on that specific mech, because it is different from the regular variant, but it's listed on Sana, or the regular version is listed on Sana at 1460. I think the KO variant is probably maybe 100 battle value more. I'm not sure. I mean, it's difficult to gauge because I don't know its armor or its, things like that. So we'll just say 1460. There's the awesome 9MA, which again I couldn't find battle value for, but it's pretty close to the Clan Invasion era awesome, which comes in at 1812. It's an amazing mech that. It's got the extended range PPC, so it doesn't have the minimum range penalties. That's an important point as well on the minimum range penalties, just to go back to that very quickly. The ERPPC for the Inner Sphere doesn't have minimum range penalties either. So that kind of brings things up. It's another reason why I don't think you should start to mess around with the kind of rules as written for the weapons, because the Inner Sphere do get those advantages as well. Not in LRMs. That's important to know, but they do get with the ERPPC. We've then got down into the medium and the light mechs. There's the Bushwacker. This is it's a specialised variant, but I think it replaces its LRM for a couple of M lasers, something like that. Can't find the actual proper value, but it's listed. The regular version is listed at 1223. We then got the Centurion. Again, I'm just going to go from the Centurion from the Clan Invasion era. That's 1130, and then the Wolfhound coming in at 1061, and that gives a total of 8,144. So, there is actually a plus 165 battle value point advantage there to the Inner Sphere. I don't think that would cause anyone to kind of cry too much, though. You could also, if you really wanted to, if you wanted to follow the cartoon, you could bring a supplementary Hunchback 2 for the clans. They are pretty terrible mechs. They're very, very glass cannon. And I don't think, I mean, they wouldn't be too hard to take down. You just attack them at range because they've got 2 UAC 20s, which is mad, and very little armour. But you could then like add that cost in and maybe then bring another Wolfhound for the Inner Sphere Force or something like that. That would probably equate it. But if you're going to talk about like brevity within the game, that works quite well because we're talking there a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mechs. Awesome. So that's just one more mech than a regular Succession Wars Lance on Lance. So that might only add another 15 minutes to your game. Because I don't count the elementals, because elementals are super easy to manage. So, you're not dealing with heat on them or anything like that. So they're kind of, quite quick and easy to play. Now, that's just an example there of how to use that, like, use the clan system within that, like, within the trinary setup where you've got that 15 mech. So make sure you've got, like, something that multiplies into 15. 3 pointed stars, 2 points of elementals, and then always kind of have the Inner Sphere Forces as well because they're trying to survive in terms of a loss perspective. They're not bringing traditional lances anymore, they're bringing augmented lances, so they're kind of doing what the Capellans have been doing for a long time, which is to bring 4 mechs and 2 vehicles or 6 mechs, or just to make it like to give the Inner Sphere like the numbers advantage, which is a massive factor in BattleTech. Although, saying this, they've got the elementals on the field, so the clans obviously get that to kind of mitigate it. But having more units on the table is an advantage because it gives you an initiative advantage. I'm not going to go into that now, but it's self-apparent if you're playing it on tabletop. If you're kind of following that, one of the problems with a crunch, when I was talking about like Inner Sphere players bringing 25 Saladins, that just gives them such an advantage, and it's not fun for anyone. I don't think it's fun for the Inner Sphere player to only play with 25 Saladins and no mechs. And I don't think it's fun for the clan player just to play like grind all day against blowing hovercraft up. I mean, it's just not fun. Anyway, I'll leave it there because that's my little thesis on how to fix the clans. Hope you enjoyed that, and I might do a little bit more on the clans over the next few weeks because I've just finished painting them all, and I've always had an appreciation for the clans again as like the antagonists of the piece, but I think I might start playing them a little bit, and I might start trying to get into the lore a little bit. And not just always be like, when I'm in a grumpy mood and I want to kind of teach someone a lesson on the battlefield, I'll bring a crunchy clan lance or something like that. But just to kind of, see where I can go with that. It's important to note as well that I do use them in my mercenary force. Like, within the personal lore that I created for the dust counters, someone from the Draconis Combine takes the dust counters over in the post-clan invasion period. And becomes like a little bit like reverential towards like clan tech and not so much clan society, but they have an appreciation for it that a lot of Inner Sphere people don't. And they bring an entire company of clan mechs. Now, I do that because I want to kind of, in my kind of BattleTech journey, whatever you want to call it, I want to play everything and then I live vicariously through my mercenary unit, as most people do with mercenary units. So, to that end, I'm very much like, I wanted to add that in as a thing so that I can play them, and I've got like clan mechs as well that I obviously like. I even have like a point of elementals in my mercenary force, which is a long story. It's all about how they basically managed to dupe a smoke jaguar star into being bondsman. So I do actually play with elementals in that force because I like the elementals. I think they are a really fun like innovation that occurs within the game set. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.